Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. I'll just give everyone a second to filter in. We got a pretty good audience here today. I think over 60 people are joining so far, upwards of 300. So great audience today. So thank you all for joining. And a warm welcome. Today we are starting a first presentation of our webinar series for invasive species in agriculture. My name is Torin Kelly. I am the lead of special projects with the Invasive Species Council of BC, and I am leading this project around invasive species agriculture and training. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that we're all joining today from different traditional territories across the province. But I'd like to recognize that I am very grateful to be joining from the traditional ancestral territories of the Kwantlen and Katzie First Nations, who have stewarded the lands and waters that is now known as Maple Ridge since time immemorial. We've got an excellent presentation for you today by Mike Dedels from the Grasslands Conservation Council of BC. Just before we begin, I do want to have a quick run through of some Zoom housekeeping items for Zoom webinars for those who might not be intimately familiar. If you are experiencing any technical problems today with Zoom, please use the chat box, and Mel, who is running our tech support, will do her best to assist you throughout. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type those into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. If you are not comfortable asking or typing in your Q&A, your questions in that box, there is a function that you can upvote questions, and those that have the highest upvotes we'll start with first, but we will do our best to get to all of them. We will be taking time at the end of the presentation, as well as kind of about halfway through today's presentation, to answer some of these questions. If we do run out of time to address all of the questions today, or if there's any specific questions from our recorded presentations moving forward, we'll share those questions and answers by email a bit later. We will be recording today's session. So if you want to view it again or share it with your colleagues or networks, you'll be able to do that once it is up on our YouTube channel, which will also be shared out once that's finished. But without further ado, I'm excited to introduce to you our first speaker of the webinar series, Mike Dedels. Mike is a professional agrologist, primarily working as an executive director for the Grasslands Conservation Council of BC. Mike has worked on noxious weeds with Forest Service summer crews in 1981 and 1982, and he's had a hard time getting away from invasives ever since. Other roles, he has had other roles as a zone agrologist in Kamloops and invasive plant program coordinator with the TNRD, which has given him a long-term perspective of invasive species and grasslands in BC. So, Mike, without further ado, take it away.
Yeah, I'll get my share going here. From the beginning.
From the beginning.
Here we go. Glad
Perfect.
to be with you here this morning. Here's a picture of me out in the field a little bit, Tunqua Lake, and a picture near Merritt and Lundbaum with the crew from the Forest Service in the field. So I'm lucky to be here today. I'm speaking right from IR1 in the heart of the Kamloops Traditional Weapon Territory, and get to work with First Nations folks all across the province. And I always enjoy a great day out in the grasslands with First Nations folks. There's a little bit about my background. Starting from when I was a little kid, my weed experience was pretty early. I would go to my mom and say, I'm bored, and she'd say, you can go pull weeds, and I would say, I'll find something else to do. Into my teen years, I did lots of landscaping. I can remember one big job, pulling a wall of diffuse snapweed back when it tended to be really large. In my 20s, I got to work further in invasive plants during university with the summer weed crews, and then I moved into the sales field, traveling around the southern interior of BC with Buckerfields for a while, and got to know the grasslands there. And for those who have been in the invasive plant business, you know that once you've done it for a couple of summers, all you see is weeds everywhere. So it really changes your view of the landscape. In my 30s, I started with the Forest Service and the range program. And so there's a picture of my old range crew back in about 92 out in Lac du Bois, and Jim White in the foreground, and I'm the young dark-haired fellow on the left. and got opportunity to work all over some great country, including getting to ride at the top of Buster Mountain and places like that. Early on, I was a member of the Grasslands Conservation Council, which was formed in 1999 after all the land use planning processes in the 90s. It was decided that there's nobody speaking for grasslands in BC. So varied group got together, including conservationists, ranchers, land managers, and all sorts working on grassland issues. So down at the bottom there, you'll see Grasslands Boulevard adjacent to Kamloops. I love how they name roads after what used to be there. What do we do with the Grasslands Council? Well, outreach and education is a big part of it. Science and research, policy support, working on bigger picture issues, and more stewardship projects is what we've been focusing on lately. Up to the right there, speaking of invasives, is a stand of yellow bedstraw near Kamloops, and it's a fairly isolated weed that is only in that one little area. The bottom is the Douglas Lake grasslands in December a couple of years ago. Beautiful grasslands up there. So why does it matter? And that's going to be the focus of this discussion, not so much listing all the weeds and their control methods. Uh, Traditional use, right from the time the glaciers receded, indigenous peoples moved in and they were not only using the plants that were there, they were managing those plants through harvesting, moving plants around, and the use of fire. So big use on grasslands, particularly because of the many values on them. Wildlife habitat, including for species at risk. You'll quite often hear that even though we're less than 1% of BC is grasslands, so over 30% of the species at risk require grasslands for at least part of their life cycle. And then, of course, forage and food security. Grasslands are one of the few places where, you can produce food off a relatively intact ecosystem. Most of what you see on your plate comes from lands that have been totally switched over to crop production. But in the case of the cattle and sheep industries and others, you can produce food right off fairly natural systems. Water cycle, of course, a healthy grassland safely captures, stores, and releases water. And so healthy grasslands are really important to that. And of course, more of a focus these days is carbon storage and the impacts on climate change. And a healthy grassland stores lots of carbon in the roots. And if you Google carbon storage in grasslands versus trees, you'll quite often find that grasslands come out pretty high on that list. And haven't included here things like recreation and such, which are very important on grasslands. In BC, I said less than 1%, so we're a small piece of the puzzle here, but very important, and it's a bit of a different mix than most of BC. Like we've got well over 90% of BC is crown land, but in the picture of grasslands, there's a lot more percentage of private. And so the implications of that I'll talk a little bit about when it comes to managing invasive plants. And here's a map that we've got on the right there of the grassland regions of BC. And you'll see the overlap there with invasive plant locations across the province. And pretty good overlap. Through the Okanagan and Thompson areas, those darker areas where you can see the locations of invasive plants. The East Kootenays, partly the reason you see more occurrences there is because they've done good inventories in those areas. But there's a big overlap between invasive plants and grasslands in BC. I see a raised hand here. I'll be taking questions partway through here, so I'm just going to close that and we'll get back to it later. If it's a technical issue, you can chat with the manager here.
Yeah, thank you. So if any tech problems, please reach out to Mel in the chat there, and she's happy to answer those.
So as far as threats to grasslands goes, the big one is conversion to other land uses. Once grasslands have been developed, you lose them, and so then they're done. But degradation through improper use, whether that be grazing and recreation, is a big impact. But probably the biggest over the broadest part of BC's grasslands is invasive species. they occur on almost every grassland in BC. You've got some kind of invasive species. So as a broad impact, invasive species is a big one. And of course, climate change is a concern and lack of awareness I throw on there just because most people don't even know we have them in BC. And a lot of people who even live in them aren't really aware of the values of grassland. Right from the start of the Grasslands Conservation Council, invasive species have been a big part of it. Here's the magazine we put out back in 2001. And Grasslands Under Siege, the weed invasion is the first of a three-part series. Back in our early days, it was deemed to be the first one to write about as far as importance. And because of those issues on the left, some of which I've talked about already, grasslands and weed invasion is a big issue. That has led to us working in around 2014 because it was considered by many on the cattle industry that there wasn't enough being done. So Douglas Lake Ranch sort of got us together to convene a meeting based at Douglas Lake and to put some pressure on the government to get more work done. And it did result in a $2.2 million project through the TNRD, a 3-year pilot. But sadly, ongoing funding continues to be a major issue with invasive plant management. And here's just a bit of on that funding program that came out then. I happened to start with the TNRD right when this was getting going and had the benefit of having expanded funding for working on highway work and such around the Thompson-Nicola Regional District at that time. As I mentioned, this talk isn't going to be about listing all of the plants in BC and how to invasive plants and how to control them. There's lots of great resources through the province. There's invasive species through the province of BC who manages them, and there's lots of very knowledgeable people in there. There is also through Invasive Species Council, you can find the invasive species and some control methods. This one here, I'll just click on this one because it does show an interactive map you can find on the Invasive Species Council site. And through that, you can go and click on various regions, and they've all got their own method of putting information out, but there's lots of great information through Invasive Species Councils in BC. And I'm in the TNRD, so you go down to East Kootenay, and you can find information on all these areas that have grasslands in them.
Mike,
Yep.
just to let you know, we can't see the map that you're sharing.
Oh, you can't.
But
Okay.
no, but I can
Yeah.
have Melanie post that in the chat so everyone can have a look at it while you're talking, if that works.
Okay. I've got to get back to my presentation here. There we go. And locally, the Regional Invasive Plant Library at the TNRD is a very good one, and I've stolen a number of their pictures for this presentation, but it's got pretty detailed information both on distribution and control methods for invasive plants here. A little bit more information. Torrin will be mentioning this. There's another webinar next weekend, and Catherine Tarasoff, I'm sure, will do a great job talking about integrated pest management on weeds, and you can tune in there. And in addition, Dave Ralph did this webinar for us a couple of years ago. And so back then, Dave was working with Invasive Species Council, and he did this webinar for the Grasslands Council that we have on our YouTube page. And it's great that we can work across organizations together. So this was a really good one that goes back and covers the history of knapweed in BC. And the really a lot of the invasive species programs started back with that, with concerns in the 40s, and then through the 60s, and then into the 70s, things started getting organized with the Knapweed Action Committee and such, and moved forward from there, and then expanded into other invasive plants. But there's a good treatment of the various control methods there. But I'm going to talk more about why they matter. A big question here is we spend millions and millions of dollars on invasive plant control, and why bother? One of the big ones is forage quality. The focus of this webinar series is on the agriculture side of it. So I'll start with forage quantity and quality, and that's really what drove invasive species programs, is concerns from ranchers about degradation of grasslands. So here's just a picture I took a couple weeks ago out of Lundbaum, and it's a great time of year to see invasive plants. You can see the dark spots on the hillsides that are knapweed infestations, and it's sort of like a little cancer spreading across the hill there that's really easy to see in the fall. These are very dwarfy sort of knapweed plants. You can see on the left, it's near the same location. They're not your standard couple feet tall. They're just small ones, but still they have major reductions on forage in forage production. And where I say it depends then there, I started doing a bit of a search into here and to try to get some numbers on, what reduction of forage there would be. And I could take an average and say there's going to, 45% reduction or whatever, but it wouldn't mean that much because it really depends on where you are. In an area like this, the picture on the left there, you can see that forage has been reduced greatly. The grasses that are growing there are small and stunted, and there's not much forage there. And that's what it's like over a lot of this area, but there's areas where you've only got a few invasive plants and your reduction might be a lot less. So it really depends on what you're starting with. If you're in a upper elevation area with 800 kilos a hectare of production, and all of a sudden it switches to weeds, it's a pretty major reduction for you. If you're on lower grasslands with less production, it's not quite as big a reduction volume-wise, but it's key to how you can use that area. And the other problem is that, when you try to manage this area, um, as you lose areas to invasive plants and they've got some grasses left in them, it puts more pressure on the rest of the grassland to provide the forage so the animals that were going to be there. And because the weeds quite often are where the animals tend to congregate, the animals will go back and use the plants that are remaining in the weed stand, and then they'll go up the hill. So you're really putting pressure on the bunch grasses that remain there at that time. As far as quality goes, knapweed does produce some forage, but if you're using it, the main time you'd use it is in the spring, and it's the same time that is key for grassland management. So you'd be hitting knapweed at the same time as you're hitting the bunch grasses that are there. So trying to manage with grazing animals is a challenge. We had a session out here a few years ago talking about goat grazing, and there has been research on cattle grazing on knapweed, but it's a challenge to do in the prescriptive way that you would need to do it effectively on this ground. Knapweed, like I said, does provide some forage. There's many weeds that don't provide any, and I'll be talking about a few of those too. So huge impacts on forage production in BC. Impacts on wildlife species, including species at risk. Here's a picture just at Lac du Bois. I went out with Parks this spring at about 4:30 in the morning and did a quick survey of the sharp-tailed grouse. So up on the right there is one of the leks at Lac du Bois. And sharp-tailed grouse are known to like these little open areas for their dancing grounds. Now, would they use them the same way if they were infested with weeds? I'm not sure. There hasn't been I don't know of that much research that talks about the quality of habitat for sharp-tailed grouse or other species at risk. I'd like to know more, and I think it's an area where the Grasslands Opportunity has the chance to partner up on research projects. This is just a report that was done on the impact of invasive species on species at risk in BC. It's a pretty general report, and it talks a lot about invasive reptiles and such too. But you can see on the left just a bit of a summary out of that report. But when it comes to impacts, I thought I'd go through this grassland monitoring guide for us. We put this out in about 2005 after a lot of work with a bunch of very knowledgeable people. I got to sit around the table and learned a lot with the crew at that time. And it is available on our website, bcgrasslands.org, under resources. So the full manual is available there. We haven't printed any for a while, but we might have to do another print fairly one of these days soon. But what it does is it talks about grassland indicators. So if you're going to measure your grasslands over time and try to monitor them, there's a few things we're looking at: plant community composition, structure, hydrological cycling, stability, and invasive plants. So that talks about the quality of the grasslands, and invasive plants have an impact on all of those, not just the last one. So some of these pictures are a little fuzzy because they were copied out of the manual there. And so when it comes to plant community composition, the main thing that it's based on is bunchgrass community and compared to the reference conditions. So what should be there in a site versus what you've got. So the top picture is just showing a blue bunch wheatgrass community. Uh, and on the right, you can see that it fills most of the frame. On the bottom, within a greatly altered landscape, it's got less than 20%. If that was done on a weedy site, then the weeds are having an impact, generally having an impact by displacing the bunch grasses that should be there. And that impacts biodiversity, definitely impacts the production on the site, impacts erosion, impacts the habitats. Do animals use the weedy communities the same way as they would the native communities? And impacts carbon storage too. So just a picture when it comes to talking about native bunchgrass cover, one of the challenges is always where do you measure it? So on these little ridge tops here, you can see that knapweed has had a fairly good impact. So if you're doing your monitoring on those ridge tops, you're going to find lots of bare ground. You're going to find a highly altered community and a bit of a difference. So if you go down to the lighter areas where there's more bunch grasses, the picture will look a little different. And when it comes to like forage production over this landscape, obviously you're getting more grass out of some areas than others. The next indicator there is plant community structure. So it's not just about grasses and grasslands. I've had people say to me that we shouldn't call ourselves the Grasslands Conservation Council because people don't care about grasses that much. Maybe we should be the Grassland Wildfire Council or something like that. And because there's lots more out there than just grasses. There's the shrub community, and then there's the tall grass community, lower grasses, and then of course the ground cover and the biological crust, and then all the forbs that come out there, particularly in the spring, you'll find them on the grasslands. But even this time of year, you'll see things like sticky geranium and old man's whiskers greening up on the grasslands. What this doesn't show is the root structure. So not the community structure isn't just above ground, it's below ground as well. And a diverse plant community above ground gives a full root zone. Plus all of the flora, the fauna that's in there with it, the soil fauna, which I'm not an expert on, but there's been many studies that talking about the diversity of insects that make up, or invertebrates that make up the soil fauna. And just on structure, here's just a picture that I took this summer of fire recovery on a fire that happened just above the hospital in Kamloops. And you can just see a bit of the structure there. You've got tall grasses, there's some shorter grasses mixed in. You can see a few forbs starting to sprout up already. This is about 2.5 months after the fire. You can see a rabbit brush shrub in the middle, and the rabbit brush is quite often sprouting there. Some of the sagebrush there was killed off, and then there's a few trees scattered around. The smaller trees were largely killed off by this fire. So it's been an interesting topic to look at, fire and plant composition. But if you're monitoring this site, you've got a bit of diversity in the structure there. Um, Nutrient cycling, so litter. A grassland community produces lots of grass in the year, and the neat thing about grasses is they grow and die every year. And so in the fall, you've got your dead material from the year, and that drops to the ground over the years and provides litter, and that covers the soil and cycles nutrients. But the other thing it does is it protects the soil from erosion and protects it from heating. So a bare soil heats up much quicker than one that does have grass material on top. So less litter means less protection for the soil. And the other one is the biocrust, which has a major impact on nutrient cycling, water cycling, and everything in the soil, and is getting to be talked about more all the time now. last night at our agrologist meeting, I had the opportunity to hear a presentation about rehabilitating biocrust on Trans Mountain Pipeline. So that was a really interesting project where they actually gathered biocrust, froze it for a couple of years, and then went out and scattered it again on the pipeline. And they have had some decent results. It was good to hear. And here's a picture of the same kind of area at Lundbaum, and you can just see how much bare soil there was there and the lack of litter. The knapweed doesn't produce a whole lot of dead material that falls to the ground to protect it. And so you don't get that litter protection on the ground and the nutrient cycling that comes with it. And there's just a picture of some of the bare ground there with the lack of litter and showing rodent collection of seeds around the hole there. And then site stability, erosion, of course, is a big impact, and you can see a couple of examples of erosion types out there. And I think a lot of us don't realize when we go out on grasslands that aren't looking very, very good, that it might have been an impact of erosion over many years, taking soil away. And I've got the next picture here that shows a bit of that. This is on Wheeler Mountain above Kamloops. And I think this, it's got a long history of grazing there. I'm told that sheep used the top of this mountain fairly heavily years back. And you can just see that there's a pretty good grass stand on the left there, right adjacent to it. It's been eroded right away. And then it is starting to have some recovery of the biocrust there, and grasses are slowly moving back. But grassland recovery is a slow process. And in the meantime, you've left it open for the impact of invasive plants. And then the last indicator is invasive plants. So, of course, invasive plants are going to impact largely on that indicator. But this shows you a little bit about distribution. And so, if you've only got a small patch, then it's controllable and you're not impacting that much of the community. But if you've got multiple patches, then you're impacting more areas, and that's sort of like similar to that picture of lac de bois that I was showing. And then if you've got continuous distribution, then it gets even harder to control because the weeds are everywhere. When it comes to doing something about the plants, some of the treatment considerations are listed here, and I'll talk about each one of those. Um, and so part of it, is who's dealing with the weeds on private land, which, as I showed, a lot of the grasslands are on private land. Uh, it's the private landowner's responsibility, and we've got private landowners in BC who are doing a great job in invasive plant control, and we've got some who are it's not as high a priority, so it's not happening. Um, and private land includes conservation holdings, so Nature Conservancy and other groups, they've been fairly active in controlling invasive plants on their properties. And these days, there's more First Nations owned ranches that are included in that private list. And we're looking to work more with First Nations on making sure that we have good, healthy grasslands there. On the Crown land side, of course, we've got vacant Crown land, and almost all the grasslands in BC have grazing licenses on them, or a good majority. And so there, it's up to the Ministry of Forest and their programs to manage plants. And grazing leases are a smaller portion, but they're very important around the Kamloops area. And matter of fact, I get to go out and look at one tomorrow. And then there's parks and protected areas, which have a very limited budgets for invasive plant control, but invasive plants are an important impact on biodiversity and the other things we value on native grasslands and parks. Federal lands, including Indian reserves, are about 10% of BC. So working with those organizations on managing invasive plants in their areas is another priority. National parks, we don't really have a grassland national park in BC, but there is talk of moving forward in the South Okanagan still. And there's a couple of Department of National Defense properties, including around Vernon, where Scotch thistle is a major concern. And then there's a large one in the Caribou as well. So that impacts on who's going to be managing invasive plants on the grasslands. I've got utility corridors in there in yellow because they tend to cross over all of those. Things like the Trans Mountain Pipeline and hydro lines, they'll move from one to the other very quickly, and they can also be major corridors for invasive plant spread. Next consideration is land use, whether it's traditional uses, First Nations uses, agriculture use, conservation uses. So there's an example, just an array of cows on grasslands, and um, so it depends on your priority. And if you're the landowner and you're looking for forage, invasive plants might be fairly important to you. If you're looking for conservation values, you're looking for healthy natural plant communities, of course, healthy grasslands will be important. Multiple use, a lot of BC's grasslands do have multiple use, almost all of them, especially on the crown side. So you're managing from multiple values there. On the left, there's just a picture of the Trans Mountain Pipeline. That's an area that's actually taken to seeding pretty well and recovering. There's some parts of it that are looking a bit worse than that, and they do impact on a large part of the grassland there. And then, sort of like I say, it depends on the goals. Here's a group of us. We got together the fall before last out at the Lundbom with representatives from 5 different Indigenous organizations, getting on the ground, talking about what we wanted to look like in the end, how we get there. So there's the invasive plant control options, invasive plant management. It comes down to cultural and mechanical controls, chemical controls, and biological controls. And we just talked about those options and the impact on the community and potential restoration. And like some of these areas have enough of a weed population that really restoration is the only way to bring them back, and which would include seeding. And so then seeding for uh, to bring back the grass community is a question. Would you do that with native seed or with domestic seed? And then it's priorities, and this is the big one when it comes to budgets. Is you've got limited dollars. What are you going to spend those dollars on? Uh, every one of those weed committees in the different areas has charts like this that take you a list of the weeds and then talk about priorities. And sometimes, like in Kamloops, we have got it divided up into 5 different areas, wherein the priorities may be different in different areas. I mentioned yellow bedstraw at the start. There's only one very small area of it around BC, and right in Kamloops there, and so it's a priority not to let it start in other areas. Yeah, another constraint and the factor when you're considering invasive plants on grasslands is neighbors. When we ran in the Elephant Hill invasive plant program, there's organic farm there on the left, so there's going to be no spray treatment in that ditch because you don't want to be contaminating that. And so we did some mechanical control there. It's a short-term impact there. Of course, you can see that there is regular mechanical control through mowing on the roadsides, which can have the effect of stopping flower production, but can also spread weeds, which is another problem. On the left there is just a picture of an area that I hand pulled that was above our riparian areas. So you've got some constraint on chemical treatments on the riparian areas. And then budgets. And so if you've got a little bit of money and you've got tons of weeds, which weeds do you control? And after being in the invasive plant program for a while, I can sort of understand why, they're leaning towards the new invaders, because when there's small areas of weeds, they're easier to control for less dollars than large areas of infestations, which tend to be the highest concern for some users on the grasslands. This is a study that was done out of TRU a couple of years ago, and put out looking at public's thoughts on the benefits of control practices and what the willingness to pay would be. And I'm just going to check my time. Yeah, about halfway through here, and so maybe it's time I could take a couple of questions before I start talking a bit more about some individual invasive plants.
For sure.
Any questions?
Yes, there's a couple questions here, Mike, and I think you've actually just rolled into a good part of your presentation to answer them. So first one,
Can't quite hear you there, Torn.
Oh, sorry about that. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Sorry about that. Anne has a question for you. Anne asks, I have a farm in Pritchard, and we have natural grasslands as a part of our acreage. My question is about buckbrush, aka Western snowberry. It is not a weed, but it is becoming very invasive and renders a lot of area unusable. How can we keep it in check?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I am going to be talking a little bit about native plants a little farther on this presentation, although I haven't included the shrub species too much. Uh, Obviously, they're not listed as invasive plants. The definition of invasive plant through the ISCBC is a non-native species that is impacting economically and environmentally. So it doesn't fall in that category. But private landowners can control those plants on it. And really, your control methods would be similar to what they are for other invasive plants. Mechanically, it would be a challenge on most brush species because if you cut them, they're going to tend to come back. Fire, likewise, I think I'm not sure of its impact on all those, but most of those grassland species are fairly good root sprouters, so you're not going to have long-term control. So and there's no biocontrols for them. So it sort of comes down to chemical control or managing them with grazing, as far as I can see.
Thank you, Mike. And the other question we have from Colleen here, does the grassland monitoring guide you mentioned also apply to management of natural grasslands, or is it just primarily for agricultural?
No, it is specifically for natural grasslands. It really doesn't have a section on it for agricultural. And it is divided up with based on different indicators for different species, different areas, from lower grasslands to upper grasslands and fescue grasslands in different areas. So there's a few different sections on it that would apply to different native grasslands.
Okay. And the last question here from Wade is, the forest encroachment and modern fire suppression a significant threat to grasslands?
Again, I'm going to talk about that one a little farther on here, Wade.
Okay. Oh, we have a few more questions coming in. Mike, you let me know when you think you should get back to it. Could you answer one or two more questions?
I'm good for a couple more.
Okay, great. We have a question here. As per the Okanagan, what is the grasslands plan for tree of heaven in Siberian elm? I don't know if you would speak to this,
And
Mike,
and
or
really, they're not so much grassland impacts,
Mhm.
and although there are big impacts down there, and Tree of Heaven particularly because of its alternate host problem, not such big grassland. Although in some areas I have seen them. You've probably talked to Lisa Scott with the Southern Okanagan, yeah, South Okanagan Similkameen, and they've been working on that in those areas. Uh, Siberian elm is a huge challenge throughout the interior. These trees ones are just sort of starting to rise up as far as being an issue in the province. And I know that provincially through the invasive species working group, they are getting more attention. With the Grasslands Council, those ones probably aren't going to be our highest priority to work on, but definitely a concern.
And we have a question here. Can private individuals with naturalist backgrounds who live in these remote grassland regions contribute to tracking invasive species in unmonitoring areas? Perhaps is there projects that they could support, Mike?
I was just talking to actually Wade, I'm not sure if it's the same Wade, who last night at the meeting about using iNaturalist. And I think I'd love to get a few iNaturalist sessions on grasslands to look at tracking both invasives and native species, grass and animal bird species. Um, but there is also the invasives app, and I've got a little highlight of that later on. For people, particularly when you're seeing new invasive plants that you haven't seen before. But I think we've got a real room with the Grasslands Council to increase citizen science.
Okay, awesome. There are a few other questions in the chat, Mike, but maybe we can answer those at the end, if that works.
I'll try to zip through the rest of my slides.
Great, thanks.
So as I mentioned, this isn't meant to cover all of the invasive plants in BC and their control. So, but invasive grasses are becoming more of a concern, and I put them up at the front here because we tend to talk about them last. But this is out at Douglas Lake last year where I was talking to the ranch there, and you can just very easily see the cheatgrass patches moving in there, and they can see them on the satellite, the expansion of them. And it's really, it's a pretty good grassland community there, and not that much grazing impact. So we did a transect there, and we're going to try to monitor their spread and just why that is happening. And control methods on annual grasses in grasslands are a challenge. Three other grasses there listed. A couple of them, bulbous bluegrass is getting more of a concern, particularly in agriculture. And the other two, we don't have much in the northern areas, but are moving up a bit from the south. So the other challenge is that a lot of invasive plants are, fairly showy flowers. You can see blueweed, you can see orange hawkweed and spotted knapweed. You can see them on the landscape. And so people know when they're moving in, but people don't really notice the invasive grasses as much. So one of the challenges we got there is even people who know a little bit about grass don't really watch for them maybe as much. And for the general public and landowners, I think they're a real challenge. And they really decrease the value of the grasslands for just about everything and make it more prone and less climate resilient. Lots of knapweed. Like I said, there's a good knapweed presentation from Dave Ralph. This is just a picture I took this fall. This is a new protected area in Kamloops. And so there's patches of knapweed there that are probably pretty good, control candidates moving forward. I was a little surprised to see this Cyphocleonis, one of the biocontrols on it, out quite late in the year on those knapweed stands. But knapweed is, it's getting all prevalent all through the interior. I haven't got a slide on here about diffuse knapweed though, and it is a biocontrol success that has decreased in a big way over the last 40 years with numerous biocontrols on it. One concern that is highlighted for me more just in the last 3 or 4 years, getting out on the grasslands is Russian knapweed. It's not everywhere, but here at Lac du Bois, there's big patches of Russian knapweed, and it's spreading rooted, and they're just got a new biocontrol on it. So, but it does, rather than taking up the dry slopes like the spotted knapweed you saw in the pictures, it's taking up these critical areas around wetlands, and so that's a concern. The picture on the right shows a patch of Russian knapweed in the McQueen Creek Ecological Reserve. So it's an area that hasn't been grazed for about over 40 years. And despite that, the Russian knapweed is moving in there too. So as you can see, very monoculture, not much growing in there. Cattle will use it a little bit, but the forage value is not what you would have in a normal area around riparian area for sure. Burdock, not the same forage reduction, but of course the birds are a real problem for livestock, pets, and for species at risk, including bats. And there's all sorts of pictures of bats caught in burdock you can find online. And here's one of them, and that's sort of a sad sight. The picture I got on the right is some burdock that we actually went out and just took the seeds away, and then we chopped it at the root, and that was a year and a half. And so this is the growth that we got a year and after over a year on it. And so it produced very little seed this year, even after just controlling it through cutting it down the year before. And so it can be done, and they don't impact the grasslands as much, but they do impact the open forests on the edge of grasslands. Scotch thistle, big bad one that is becoming a much broader problem, and particularly in North Okanagan. And there's a picture of the size of these things on the right, and you can just imagine how the nutrient draw on the ground and that. And when you've got that picture on the left is along the Bella Vista Trail and in Vernon, and that right above the fence there is solid Russian thistle, and both forage values are decreased to virtually nothing, and I can't imagine there's a whole lot of wildlife using those spots either. Field scabious, I hadn't dealt with very much, and there's very little of it in BC. There's some above Douglas Lake Ranch that's been there for a while in the higher areas, like you can see on the right. And this is the patch on the left is near Clay Lake and Lac du Bois. And you can just see the way the rosettes cover the ground there, really not leaving much room for much to grow. the pat on the left there, it had been sprayed, and on the right, it hadn't. So they're looking at trying to eradicate that, but it's been a long, slow process on that piece of Spiel scabious. Very little of it in the interior, and we'd like to keep it that way. Hoary cress and Hoary alyssum generally cover disturbed areas a little more, and they're not really growing in grasslands in a big way, although I'm worried about hoary cress, particularly around wet areas and riparian areas, and the potential for spread there. And it's interesting because the hoary cress flowers so early that it's pretty well done by early June. And so by the time a lot of invasive plant programs get going, it's already produced its seed and done, whereas hoary alyssum produces seeds throughout the year. The picture on the right there is near the Cal Tire Center in Vernon, which if you're looking to run an invasive species field day, you can do it all from the parking lot there and find about 15 species. Blueweed, big problem in the nickel area, and has been for a number of years. And again, those rosettes will cover the ground, and there's just not much left there for producing other plants. So big impact on grasslands. The picture on the right is a very small patch that has been around Lac du Bois for about 20 years, and we try to get rid of it, and there just continues to be plants pop up. So my goal over the next few years is to have that patch eradicated, because as long as you've got little patches producing seed, you're never going to be rid of it. And then new populations, we found this one plant at near Tunqua Lake 2 years ago, and we pulled it out and bagged it. And there's one other little patch in the area, but other than that, it's 30 kilometers away from the other the blueweed infestation. So we definitely want to get hold of that one before it spreads and does more damage. Chicory, I think, was for a long time was considered to be mostly a roadside problem, but we're finding it invading a lot of trail edges and depressions at Lac du Bois and in other areas. And this is a couple of us were out last year, and we did a try at just taking away the flowers and seeds at the end of the season. Bit of a chicory bash. Common bug loss. This plant, this little patch here, we found it last year, and it's about well over 100 kilometers from the nearest known infestation in the Okanagan, and so that's where I put the little invasive species reporting logo there. So if you want to download on that in your phone, you can locate invasive plants in the field and report them directly. And if they're new to an area like this one is, then they will be flagged by the province to go out and check and try to initiate some action. I haven't talked about, sulfur cinquefoil, toadflax, leafy spurge, and a number of other invasive plants. But like I said, you can find them in the book. And here's just a couple of, discussion points. Weeds, non-native plants, and the one on the left is, crested wheatgrass is being seeded broadly, and so a weed is a plant growing where you don't want it to be. So in some areas you're seeding it for forage and you get good production, and it's gotten very useful. In this area on the left, it's in the Soyuz Desert Center, where the idea is to have a demonstration area for the rare bitterbrush community in the South Okanagan. But you're not going to get much of a natural grass community coming in under there with the crested wheatgrass because of its persistence on that kind of area. Up on the right is um, smooth brome. Turns that brown in the fall. Really easy to see smooth brome patches, and it's reddy brown, and not much forage value in the fall. But spreading by the roots, it's a domestic species that will be very persistent. And again, if your goal is to get native production back, that's not going to be happening with that. And in the bottom is some alfalfa that moving into a draw there. And again, through Lac du Bois, alfalfa has been broadly seeded, valuable forage species. But if you don't want it there, then it can be difficult to control, and there is potential for it to spread. And I know that I've talked to many ranchers who say last thing they want in their seed mixes is alfalfa because of the potential for bloat in the spring and the lack of forage value in the fall. And then there's many ranchers who value it highly in seed mixes and will spread it, use it in most of their mixes. And then, as was asked, forest encroachment. Picture down there in the right is in Churn Creek, and it's the largest grassland park in BC. And in the adjacent forest, there's been a real active group doing forest encroachment work there, working on Douglas fir stands like that to try to thin them out. The upper picture is a picture of ponderosa pines moving in on what would be a grassland there right above it. All those pines are like 50 years or less. And so before that, that was an open slope, which would be covered with balsam root in the spring. But as those fill in, you lose your bunch grasses, you lose your biodiversity, and you increase your fire hazard. Uh, and then on the left is sagebrush, and our recent magazine highlighted sagebrush a bit. Native plant here, but in that kind of quantity, it's not health good for the plant community. And overgrazing over the years in some of these lower slopes increased sagebrush, and now this is right in the lower slopes of Mount Paul above Kamloops, and you can see little patches of blue bunch wheatgrass in there. They're trying to hang along in with the cheatgrass and sagebrush. And Kamloops, adjacent to me, has done work on mechanical control of sagebrush because of concern for bighorn sheep habitat. And in what role does the Grasslands Council have? I'm going to zip through some of our stuff pretty quick here, as I want to save a couple minutes. Yep. Education. We're very active on social media, getting the word out about the value of grasslands. Outreach programs for landowners. Promoting proper grazing. That picture on the right there is actually chicory moving into a private grassland. I've never seen chicory so short, but grazing can work, and sometimes it doesn't. And I've done a little bit of a session on Range 101, trying to manage for healthy grasslands. And I think Catherine will be talking about more of that next week. Working with the regional invasive organizations, and then doing projects like at Lac du Bois, where we've done invasive plant pulls and planted native plant plugs, and as well as invasive plant control, particularly on new invaders to the area. So here is a map of Lac du Bois where we highlighted some of the values and some of the invasive species, and then did this report on priority invasive plants. And so things like baby's breath, chicory, field scabious, hoary crescent, hoary alyssum, and Russian knapweed, and specifically inventoried them and did some control. And we've also got projects at the Lundbaum where we did a small spray treatment this year after a few years of discussion, and we'll continue to work with the many users on the Lundbaum. And we've got demonstration sites there where we're doing different treatments of herbicide treatment as well as different mechanical treatments. And there was just reading our little demonstration plots there this year. And inventories, and there was an inventory done up at Churn Creek, and this is a couple of Churn Creek shots. And just a couple of shots of prevention seeding. Here's a new housing development, and they seeded it, but it wasn't very successful for erosion or weed control. And then there's fire control. I'm going out to this area tomorrow to look at the picture on the right there is fire guards through the Wallachine. So you've got knapweed scattered along the road, you put that disturbance in there, and then you're going to spread weeds all over the country. And then there's working with partners, which we do a lot of. And then there's my last slide, except for this one. If you're interested in joining us and continuing to spread the word about the value of grasslands, there's a little link here, and we'd be happy to have you go on there and join us and help us out.
Thank you so much, Mike. That was a great presentation. You have lots of questions coming in here at the end. I know we have just over 5 minutes, so we'll work through some of those questions. But I believe, Mike, you had a event coming up that you wanted to just briefly mention.
Yeah, we've got a couple of people working for us in outreach. Heidi's working out of the Okanagan and getting into many areas, and then Rebecca is working out of Thompson Rivers University, and she's putting together this event on November 27th at Thompson Rivers University with 5 different speakers talking about grassland values and wildlife and a number of aspects. And so I think Torrin's going to share the link on that one,
Yep.
and we it will be a live presentation, but we'll also be going online, and we're getting loads of people signed up for that one. It's a free event, and just looking to develop more interest in grasslands and Kamloops.
Amazing. So as we kind of go through these questions, I'll ask Mel here to put up a quick poll. And the reason that we're doing this poll is to see how this webinar series is positively impacting the viewership, what you guys are learning, if you're taking things away from it. So moving forward, we can adjust the webinars accordingly. So if you guys could take some time to fill that out, it's about 6 questions while we answer the questions here, that would be great. So first question here for you, Mike. What's the Latin name for buck brush you were talking about? I don't know that this is directly targeted to you. It might be to the group here, but.
Well, it was referred to as snowberry, and so that's Symphoricarpus alba.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. At least it used to be, unless they've changed it. I don't know.
Next question here. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I live in the Sagebrush neighborhood. We work hard on weeds in Peat Creek area. I'd like to know, when I'm camping and traveling within BC knapweed control areas, how do I make people aware, and how come we can spray these more? So a two-parter there.
How come we can spray these more or can't spray them more?
How come we can spray these more?
So spray programs, depending on on private lands, people can do as they need to do on them. On the crown lands, it is done. There's relatively little treatment happening on knapweed these days. There is, through the TNRD has a program where they're focusing their control dollars on what they call the Good Neighbor program. So if you've got private landowners controlling, they're trying to help out on adjacent lands. So that would be the priority areas around Kamloops as far as knapweed goes. But spraying all of it, if that was the goal here, is well, millions of dollars over the budget that's allocated.
Next question here. What treatment, chemical or others, are available in BC for invasive grass species, i.e. cheatgrass?
I should know the status of this one a bit better, but I think it's still on a trial basis in BC. I don't, and there is one that has been come up from the States that has been trialed in various areas. I don't know about its general availability yet. It would be great to be able to do it. I see big challenges, and when you look at how patchy cheatgrass populations are, like the pictures I showed there, I think it would be a real challenge to do it effectively. Or you could do it in small areas, but the large areas that tend to get covered by it would be a big challenge to try to treat.
Next one here, Mike, about grazing. So I'm wondering if Mike has encountered management intensive grazing being used effectively to manage invasive plants in BC grasslands. If so, what conditions or weed species make it most effective?
That knapweed can be grazed, and Christy Gordon, who's been involved in Kamloops and still is did her master's on that treatment. And if you've got a real solid knapweed population and you can hit it at the right time, you could do it. It's a matter of having the control. The other thing is you need to be able to have water for the animals and everything at the same time. So if you're trying to put cattle onto a small place, you're going to be challenged to get them to be able to use, to manage it all, because they won't all have water available. Goat grazing has been done broadly in BC. One of the challenges with it in the southern interior is that you're not supposed to bring in goats in proximity to bighorn sheep areas, and there's lots of those both through the South Caribou and around the Kamloops area and through Spencer's Bridge and all that. So that's one of the implications for goat grazing in this area, as well as just availability of goats and expense in managing them.
Yeah, Mike, you still have lots of questions here. We're about a minute out from the presentation, so perhaps I'll send some of these towards to you, Mike, and then we'll do our best to answer them on our end too. But before we wrap up, I see a lot of people requesting the link for Catherine Tarasoff's webinar next week. I'll ask Mel if she can just post that in the chat quickly. Feel free to sign up for that. This is a part of a 4-webinar series. Those will be advertised out and sent out to you if you are interested for the next 2 coming up later in November and December. We are also hosting 2 in-person workshops that are free, one in Williams Lake and one in Penticton. The Williams Lake course is going to focus more on forage and how you can help reduce the impact of invasive species in agricultural and natural forage areas. And the workshop happening in Penticton is going to focus more on fruits, berries, and vineyards, talking to insects, diseases that are impacting those agricultural sectors, both of which are free. Mel's going to add both of those workshop links in there. The dates are attached once you click on the link too. Other than that, I want to thank everyone for coming to the first of the webinar series. We look forward to seeing you at the next ones. And Mike, I don't know if you would like to say anything before we wrap up.
Well, thanks for attending. If you want to know more about the Grasslands Council, get a hold of us. Head to our website, and we're happy to see you at future events. I'm doing my best to get out there with field tours with folks in various areas, and so you can sign up for our newsletter online, and definitely follow us on social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. We're active on all of those and getting more active with the help of our outreach staff.
Awesome. Yes, thanks everyone for joining today. Look forward to seeing you at the next one.